I'm going to be reading out information today associated with Blackmail, Hitchcock's film from 1929. This is all sourced from brentonfilm.com. Okay. So initially this is blurb here. From Alfred Hitchcock, the master of suspense, the first thriller in sound of the groundbreaking knife scene. Quarrelling with her detective boyfriend, Alice White accepts the offer of escort from a handsome stranger. Allowing herself to be coaxed into his apartment, she resists his advances and, in a violent struggle, stabs him with a knife. But in her haste to leave the scene of the crime passionnel, she drops a glove, and this vital clue to her identity falls into the hands of a blackmailer who viciously starts turning the screw. That's the blurb from the US Republic Pictures VHS from 1994. Blackmail was based on an eponymous 1928 play by Charles Bennett, 1899 to 1995, which starred Tallulah Bankhead on its initial West End run, years before she featured in Lifeboat. Though today not remembered as much more than a footnote in the Hitch story, Bennett had a pivotal role in the creation of 8 of the master's most renowned films, and late in life finally began getting some long overdue recognition. The silent and sound blackmails have some plot variances, but both deviate from the source text in many respects, including their shared denouement being completely different to that of the play, but you get no spoilers from me. I will say that the central shocking act driving the story is made much more explicit in the sound version. Additionally, as explained in Bennett's memoirs, there's an early unpublished version of the play titled 24 Hours, which has a completely different conclusion again. The final produced play was also published, though copies are now very rare, as is the film tie-in novelization by Ruth Alexander, who produced several similar works, including The Rome Express and The Man Who Knew Too Much. According to Charles Barr, writing in English Hitchcock 1999, her Blackmail book is an extraordinary muddling together of silent film, sound film, and stage original. Hitch also described a fascinatingly dark alternate ending in a 1963 interview. That's from Blackmail, Sight and Sound, Charles Barr. As explained elsewhere, Barr's book is the definitive account of Hitch's British career and goes into fascinating depth on Blackmail, devoting what is by far its longest chapter to the film. A verbal reprise of his forensic analysis on both versions would be the perfect fit for a future audio commentary. Sticking with related books, Britain's, indeed Europe's, first talkie and its silent counterpart, also got together twice over in BFI film classics Blackmail 1993 by Tom Ryle. Hitch himself was largely responsible for adapting Bennett's play, with its author having no direct input. However, Blackmail's dialogue was credited to Labour MP and playwright Ben Levy, whose 1930 musical Evergreen was filmed as Evergreen 1934, providing a signature role for Londoner Jessie Matthews, Britain's first internationally famous film star and our biggest homegrown star of the 1930s. Levy also scripted many significant UK and US films, including Kitty 1929, The Informer 1929, Waterloo Bridge 1931, Devil in the Deep 1932, The Old Dark House 1932, Topaz 1933, and Desire 1936. Levy even wrote and directed one film himself, the Hitch-produced Lord Canberra's Ladies 1932, which survives in good condition and is long overdue for release and re-evaluation. Made on the cusp of the talkie revolution, Blackmail began production as a silent film and was part converted to sound midway through, consequently made history as Britain's first full-length talkie. Both versions were released at the same time and coexisted quite happily in cinemas, much like 2D and 3D films today. For years there's been endless back and forth about which one is best, but I love both. Each has different strengths, but neither feels wholly complete without the other. For fans more familiar with Hitchcock's later work, this is the perfect introduction to his silent period. In many ways, it most closely resembles his talkie thrillers, and there is an abundance of his trademark directorial touches for film studies chin strokers to drool over. What's more, following his brief appearance in The Lodger, Blackmail contains Hitch's only other silent film cameo. Here he appears in more substantial interlude as a bus passenger being pestered by a little boy. Also in increasingly typical self-reflexive mode, there are on-screen references to 2 earlier films, The Ring and The Constant Nymph, 1928, co-scripted by his wife Alma Reville. Though Blackmail's silent version was shot initially, the talkie version was planned for at an early stage in the proceedings, and its reshoots using the same setups followed immediately after. In fact, by the time filming was over, the demand for talkies had grown such that it was decided to release that version first. It was to be another 2 months before the silent version was completed and released. Many scenes in the finished films look very similar, but there's no actual shared footage. Bear in mind, in the days of analog film, to have repeated footage in a second negative, it would have to be taken from a copy of the original, which would have degraded the quality to an unacceptable degree. Interestingly though, the silent version actually incorporates much footage from the talkie reshoot and vice versa. The first reel in both versions comprises footage solely from the silent version shoot and has no dialogue, either via intertitles or the spoken word. This is a deliberate artistic choice, as it's an efficient scene setter, and in the sound version also serves to build anticipation for the talking reveal. History records Blackmail qualifying as a full synchronized talking picture, as opposed to many other incipient sound films of the Goat Clan variety. These include renowned US part talkies like The Jazz Singer 1927, Lonesome 1928, and Showboat 1929, not to mention various similar but lesser known British films. The Jazz Singer, for instance, was a marketing con, as it's basically a silent film with a synchronized soundtrack. It still has intertitles throughout and only 2 minutes of synchronized speech, the first of which doesn't occur until the 17.5-minute mark, just after a short song. Apart from the extended opening, Blackmail is much more of an actual talkie. Following on from all the Goatland talkies are scores of cash-in sound reissues of silence, usually with newly shot talking sequences like The Phantom of the Opera 1925 and The Godless Girl 1928. Of course, there was no cut-off point for silent films. The chopping and changing of part silent and sound versions persisted for several years, and the question of what category many of the liminal results fit into becomes pretty moot. It's somewhat reminiscent of the old gags asking at what point the world's largest Brussels sprout becomes the world's smallest cabbage, or is a zebra white with black stripes, or a black with white stripes. There are several fine resources below that make the complications of categorizing transitional silent sound era films abundantly clear, especially film historian John Belton's excellent, insightful essay. Kitty 1929 is sometimes cited as a contender for the title of Britain's first talkie, but such claims are disingenuous at best. True, its original silent version was finished and released to the public before Blackmail, but not so of Kitty's opportunistic sound version. Kitty, directed by Hitchcock's contemporary and ex-colleague Victor Saville, was first completed and shown as a silent, after which it was withdrawn for the final 2 reels to be reshot with dialogue. The silent version is a very fine melodrama, but it was at once eclipsed by the novelty of the part talkie version, and is the latter that history remembers. Its first 6 reels are identical with the silent, except that the synchronized music and effects track takes the place of a live accompaniment. The switch to dialogue for reels 7 and 8 is abrupt, clumsy, and disorientating, and as archivally based television programs from time to time remind us by using a clip of the transitional point to illustrate the crudities of that historical moment. Charles Barr in English Hitchcock 1999. Incidentally, Saville shot those 2 last reels, or possibly 3, see comment, of Kitty in the US, as the UK had no other suitable sound studio facilities at the time. While there, he also directed the remake of Woman to Woman 1923, one of the young Hitch's apprenticeship films. Both versions of Kitty survive in good condition in the BFI archive here and here, so there's possibility one day we'll all get to view each in its entirety and judge for ourselves how successfully it was retooled. In lieu of Kitty's appearance, for a great comparison to Blackmail, check out The Informer, released just 3 months later. Both its lovingly restored silent and sound versions complement each other perfectly on their US and UK releases. It was also shot at Elstree with many of the same cast and crew, and treads not too dissimilar territory thematically, being a crime thriller with a plot driven by the female contingent of a love triangle on the wrong side of the law. Following its initial release, the silent version went unseen for decades and was all but forgotten. Now, though both can be easily accessed for appraisal and the silent is held by most to be the better of the two, the sound version wasn't held by the fact that star Annie Andra was spoken for. No, I'm not referring to her sweetheart. I mean, she opened her mouth and someone else said her words. Though it obviously hadn't been an impediment in hers in Hitch's previous silent film, The Manxman, this time her native Czech accent was adjudged too strong. As a workaround, she had to mime her dialogue and was dubbed off camera by English actress Joan Barry, future star of Hitch's Rich and Strange. It's a pity, as Andra spoke English fluently and was perfectly intelligible. It was certainly no stronger than that of many foreign stars of the time who were hovering on the brink of international success. Both Greta Garbo and Marlene Dietrich had their breakthroughs in 1930, so just imagine Blackmail could have scored another significant first by beating the likes of Anna Christie and the Blue Angel in top-lining an exotically voiced female lead. But it was not to be. The filmmakers did what they felt best at the time, but the inadequate live dubbing technique certainly makes its presence felt, to the overall detriment of the sound version. The modern consensus is it would have been preferable had they simply tweaked the script to give her character a foreign backstory. There's certainly nothing in the central plot to impede the idea. Again, this has happened in countless films from that day to this, whichever version of Blackmail you prefer. They're both absolutely riveting. Thrills, intrigue, comedy, and sexuality are balanced beautifully in a fast-paced concoction that's all killer and no filler.